where 13.60 is suddenly part of the Linux conversation, what those recent HackerOne payouts by Gajina may represent, and why one $10,000 bounty should not automatically be called a kernel exploit. Let's just go ahead and jump straight into it. So let us begin with the confirmed HackerOne activity. This screenshot shows for PlayStation reports from Gajina being resolved within a fairly short period. 3 of the reports received bounties of $2,500, and one received a much larger $10,000 bounty. Added together, that is $17,500. Now, the term reserved tells us that PlayStation Complete needed its handling of the reports and awarded the listed bounties. It does not mean the vulnerabilities are public, and it gives us no information, such as what affected firmwares or technical details that may come with it. And so that means we cannot look at the screenshot and declare that Katrina has a new kernel, exploit, hypervisor, exploit, or a complete jailbreak chain. What we can say is that PlayStation considered all the 4 for findings meaningful enough to pay for, and that one of them was accessed at a substantially higher bounty than the other 3. The payout patterns is interesting, but the amounts alone cannot identify what each bug does. So here's where we can take a careful comparison, without presenting speculation as a fact. So, Gajina previously recorded a $2,500 bounty for a disclosed VDJ privilege escalation report. That work became useful as a userland entry point, and in simple terms, it provided a way to begin executing control code. But it was not a kernel exploit by itself, because the 3 new reports received the same amount. They may represent medium severity vulnerabilities or useful chain components. It could be userland issues, privilege escalation bugs, sandbox escapes, or something different. Their exact roles remain private. The $10,000 report naturally attracts more attention. Public PlayStation history shows that awards at that level can involve kernel vulnerabilities or other high-impact security boundaries. That is still not proved. Gajina directly addressed this in Discord by saying, quote, "1 OK does not mean it's a kernel bug. That is the correct way to frame it. A $10,000 report could be kernel-related, but the bounty amount does not establish that classification. So until the report is disclosed or more technical evidence appears, its role is unknown for comparison." This is what a confirmed $10,000 kernel exploit report looks like. And so we can see Mastermind, or I believe that's how you pronounce it, received a $10,000 PlayStation bounty for a PlayStation 4 13.50 this fat vulnerability. The award message indicates the issue is an integer wraparound in this fat upcase allocation logic that leads to a kernel heap corruption. PlayStation reproduced the finding, rated it high severity, and awarded the $10,000 bounty. So this example proves one limited but useful point. A $10,000 PlayStation bounty can represent a kernel vulnerability. So notice the difference here. We can see that this one clearly identifies the vulnerability as a kernel, and the award screenshot names kernel heap corruption. For Gajina's report, we only have the bounty amount and the resolved status, with no public title or technical description. So this report gives us a historical comparison, not an identification of Gajina's report. It makes the kernel theory plausible, but it does not confirm it. Now we get to the claim that creates the Linux on higher firmware discussion. Zico posted that a hypervisor bug appears to have been patched, and that it should be related to the IOMMU. This post attributes the information to another person who has also access to internal keys, and says the issue appears to be patched in firmware 14.00. The IOMMU, or Input-Output Memory Management Unit, controls how devices access system memory. Vulnerability at that boundary could help researchers gain deeper system control, potentially making it relevant to hypervisor research and Linux enablement. The firmware detail is what caught everyone's attention. If the bug was introduced before 14.00 and only fixed in 14.0, then the firmware versions below 14 may still contain it, which is going to be our 13.60. But we do not currently have a public technical write-up, proof of concept, or anything like this to make a chain between this and one of Gajina's HackerOne report. For now, this is a potentially important claim, but not a disclosed exploit. As why is firmware 13.60 specifically being discussed? The original post mentioned staying on 13.42 and below. Sonic also responded that the intended version was probably 13.60, and I absolutely agree. And he said that development could mean Linux on higher firmware. If it proves fruitful, that interpretation makes sense to me. If the suspected hypervisor issue remains present through 13.60, and is patched in 14.00, it would place 13.60 on the potentially vulnerable side of the boundary. So if you have one of these systems, do not update it. Also, do keep in mind here that the highest public PS5 kernel exploit is on firmware 12.70. Hypervisor or IOMMU vulnerability does not automatically provide the kernel access needed to use it. So this is why Linux on PlayStation 5 13.60 is a possibility to watch. It's not announced, but if you have one of those systems and you have the ability to take it offline, I would do so right now to make that clear. Here is the complete chain that would generally be needed. Step 1 is a userland entry point that could come through a browser, application, game, or DSpace path that allows controlled code execution. Step 2 is a kernel exploit. This moves beyond the restricted userland environment and provides much deeper control over the operating system. For firmware 13.60, this is the most obvious missing public component right now, because the currently discussed public coverage stops at 12.70. Step 3 is access involving the hypervisor, IOMMU, or another security boundary that prevents the level of hardware control Linux needs. The newly reported claim could potentially matter here, but the actual primitive supported firmware, range, and method of use are not public. And then step 4 is Linux enablement. Developers still need to build and test the implementation, support various PlayStation 5 hardware, handle device access, and so much more. One promising vulnerability is important, but again, it's not the same thing as a complete reliable Linux release. Is Linux on PS5 coming soon? The honest answer is maybe eventually, but the evidence does not support saying that it is imminent. We know that for PlayStation HackerOne reports from Kadena were resolved for a combined $17,500, and that we know that one report received a $10,000 reward, which is consistent with a high-impact finding. We also know from public history that a $10,000 award can represent kernel vulnerabilities. What we do not know is whether Gadzena's $10,000 report is kernel hypervisor, IOMMU related, or something else. Lena has specifically cautioned that the bounty does not mean it is a kernel bug. Separately, we have a community claim that a possible IOMMU-related hypervisor bug was patched in firmware 14.00. This has led to the interpretation that firmware 13.60 might eventually become capable of running Linux. So, the exciting part here is that researchers may have another important piece of the puzzle. The missing part is the public tested chain that connects it all together. And of course, a working Linux implementation that is on 13.60. As always, if you care about future homebrew or jailbreak options, remain on the lowest firmware possible. Now, I want to hear what you think. Is Kajena's $10,000 report the missing kernel piece? Could it be connected to the reported hypervisor issue? Or are these completely separate developments? I know I've got my opinion. Let me know in the comments. And if you want to follow this story as more details become public, subscribe for more PlayStation Homebrew updates. And thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next one. Michael out.